What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into this video, shout out to the brother Anthony, I believe it's Anthony Holloway, for the $20 donation via the Cash App. He says, thank you for doing a video on the topic that he had requested. And that was me talking about the new figures that showed that our all-time, well, not all-time, but our current birth rate in this country is the lowest it's ever been. Even in the Black community, our women in the past decade have shown a substantial decrease in the birth rate. And I want to add one other thing. Of all the factors that I listed in my video, pointed out in my video, I should say, one of the things I forgot to mention were the environmental factors, the chemicals that we are ingesting as far as in our food, in our drinking water, in our toothpaste, mouthwash, maybe. Even some of the things that we are breathing in environmentally, things that are sprayed in the air and things that are sprayed, as far as bug repellent, anything, right? And it's reflected in when you look at men and our testosterone levels. We look at our testosterone levels and our sperm counts. They've dropped 40 to 50% since the 70s. I mean, you look at some of the men in the 70s, you're 18 years old out of high school, you had a big old goddamn porn star mustache, you know what I'm saying? You got Lamont Sanford mustache, and you're hairy like goddamn Robin Williams. Now you look at some dudes and they all look like Michael Jackson. But anyway, let's segue to something a little bit more political, I guess, because I want to talk politics on this channel, but for right now, I want to stay away from things that are controversial. Lyndon Johnson, for some reason, is always revered as this great civil rights legislator. And yes, he did get a lot of things passed that on the surface seemed to benefit African Americans, but I would argue that a lot of the things that he passed ultimately were counterproductive and harmful to the Black community. That's another video for another day. One thing that Lyndon Johnson hated more than anything else was what I would call an uppity Negro. And Eartha Kitt was, by definition, I guess, what you would call uppity, right? Eartha Kitt, by 1967, was probably what I would say at the height of her career and of her fame. She was being featured as Catwoman on Batman. At that point in time, she had been, I would say, revered as a prodigy. She spoke 4 different languages. She began singing at the age of 11. And she had overcome a lot of earlier hardship in her life. But a luncheon at the White House in 1968 nearly left her hard-won career in shambles. As I said before, she was born into poverty back in 1927 on a plantation in South Carolina to a white father and a Black and Cherokee mother. Eartha Kitt overcame domestic abuse and abandonment to become a renowned singer, dancer, and actress on film, television, and on Broadway. Kitt's iconic purr and open embrace of her sexuality left many prominent men such as Orson Welles and Charles Revson captivated as far as having affairs with these men. For the rest of her life, Eartha Kitt was seen as a sex kitten, not overly raunchy, but sexual. But another thing that got her into trouble back then was, on top of her embrace of her sexuality, which, even though many white women at that time were being praised for embracing and taking control of their sexuality, right, with the feminist movement, as a black woman, Eartha Kitt caught hell for that. Because there's a double standard, even back then. She was also outspoken, always outspoken. And her outspokenness led to her becoming an activist. In May of 1967, she testified before Congress, along with Washington, D.C. youth group Rebels with a Cause, on behalf of President Lyndon B. Johnson's juvenile delinquency bill. The First Lady at the time, Lady Bird Johnson, subsequently invited Kitt to her Women's Doers luncheon on January 18, 1968, for a discussion on what women could do to help eradicate crime on the streets. Towards the end of this luncheon, Lady Bird asked a room of 50 women from groups such as the Association of Colored Women's Club and the League of Women Voters, including a few governors' wives, for their comments. Kitt raised her hand and told the First Lady of the United States exactly what she thought. Juvenile crime was in part a pushback against being drafted to serve in the Vietnam War. She said, quote, "Boys I know across the nation feel it doesn't pay to be a good guy. They figure with a record, they don't have to go off to Vietnam. You send the best of this country off to be shot and maimed. They rebel in the street. They will take pot and they will get high. They don't want to go to school because they're going to be snatched off from their mothers to be shot in Vietnam. Mrs. Johnson, you are a mother too, although you had daughters and not sons. I am a mother and I know the feeling of having a baby come out of my guts. I have a baby and then you send them off to war. No wonder the kids rebel and take pot. And Mrs. Johnson, in case you don't understand the lingo, that's marijuana." Reportedly, her comments stunned the First Lady. Some media reports erroneously stated that Lady Bird Johnson burst into tears. Women in the room ran to the microphone to defend the Johnsons and predictably level outrage at Eartha Kitt. The cultural and political backlash was swift. The Washington Post later praised and championed for their activism in the Watergate investigation during the Watergate scandal. The same Washington Post reported at the time that President Johnson had Kitt blacklisted. According to reports, Kitt alleged that the White House, which had sent a car for her, didn't arrange a car for her departure and had her to catch a cab. Immediately after this luncheon, Eartha Kitt was blacklisted by Lyndon Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson. Unable to get jobs in the United States, Kitt was forced to perform in Europe until she returned to America in 1978 to headline the Broadway musical Timbuktu. It was later unveiled by the New York Times that the CIA had openly blacklisted and put pressure on different venues to not book Eartha Kitt. And subsequently, that was kept up throughout the Nixon and Ford administrations. And it really wasn't until the late 70s into 1980s, you can even argue in the 90s, when Eartha Kitt's career began to become revitalized. We all know Eddie Murphy threw her a bone with Boomerang, Marcus Darling. And, she started having a renaissance as far as her career in her later years. Eartha Kitt's daughter, Kit Shapiro, said about Eartha Kitt's situation at the time, quote, "It was really heartbreaking to her and very upsetting that her own government turned on her for something as simple as just giving an honest response to a question. And that was really something I think that she really never let go of, that disappointment." Fortunately for Eartha Kitt, resentment against the Vietnam War and criticism of the Vietnam War were beginning to grow. A war which 3 years earlier, some 70% of Americans approved of. By now, 1968, 70% of Americans disapproved of the war. Among some notables who had spoke against the war was Muhammad Ali, who himself paid a cost and was unable to work and nearly went to prison because of his opposition against the war. As he said infamously or famously back in April 1967, "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong." Even Dr. King, who had been so close-knit with the Johnson administration and helping to push for the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act of 64 and 65, even he began to critique the Vietnam War, speak out against the Vietnam War. And we all know what happened with him. The public sentiment at the time made Eartha Kitt into the angry black woman who made sweet, lovable white woman Lady Bird Johnson cry, which actually was a lie. Even Lady Bird Johnson later admitted that she never cried. Other female celebrities who were openly anti-Vietnam against the war were Nina Simone, Mahalia Jackson, Lena Horne, and Josephine Baker. So Eartha Kitt was not alone. The CIA, if I didn't mention, the CIA also tried to portray Eartha Kitt as psychotic and as an nymphomaniac. So, that's the type of stuff that happened, man. By the time of her death from colon cancer in 2008, she had earned 2 Tony nominations, a Grammy nomination, won 3 daytime Emmys, and had transformed from a kitten to full-blown cougar goddess. And that in itself is an example of why a lot of black celebrities are petrified and terrified of speaking their mind on certain issues because they're afraid of being blackballed, not just from the government, especially, I would say, nowadays, especially if we were waging a war, but they're afraid of going against the grain, even when it comes to Hollywood. You know what I'm saying? Now, but then I mean, Hollywood generally is basically liberal, right? You could argue back in those days that Hollywood may have still had a conservative bent. Today, Hollywood is overwhelmingly liberal. Our United States government, obviously, right now, those who are leading and running it are conservative, though there is a very, very large contingency of those who are liberal. But it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if you're a black celebrity and you speak out, those who speak against you are going to be loud. They're going to have very powerful allies, and you're going to pretty much be speaking and standing up for yourself, because the mainstream media, even if they silently agree with you, they're not going to back you. And that's the plight of many black celebrities. That's why they don't want to speak out on things. We say, why don't they speak out? Why don't they speak out? Well, if you have your career ruined, when you can't financially provide for yourself, are we going to pull together and help to supplement their income, or are we going to say, oh, I got my own bills to pay for? So these people do have things to consider, man. But shout out to Eartha Kitt for keeping it real when it came to speaking her mind on the Vietnam War. Anyway, tell me what you guys think.